fortunate to be members of the Rotary Club of Orlando because our membership has a lot of really excellent speakers right here as members. And one of those excellent members, Ken Chapman, has agreed to fill in for our speaker. So let's welcome Ken Chapman.
So I'm the chief of state here today. There are so many things happening right now that I could tell you in depth, but I'm going to just give you the highlights of some very critical issues that are affecting our community in the area in which I work. First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about me. Those of you that don't know, I've been a Salvation Army officer for 14 years. In a year and a half, I'll become a major. Because you get ranked, you attain your rank by the number of years that you serve. And so I'm a fourth generation Salvationist, born and raised in the Salvation Army Church, and was raised around canteens and disasters and Thanksgiving Day feedings and feeding homeless. And about 15 years ago, the Lord called my wife and I into full-time ministry. We gave up everything we owned and had. I had a business that I ran for 20 years, Creative Events International. I was a producer for live shows for TV. I did the closing ceremonies for the Paralympics and the Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. I produced the opening and closing ceremonies for the Atlanta Olympics. Sat in green rooms with Aretha Franklin, Liza Minnelli, and people like that, and had this crazy life, a crazy life. And when we got the call from the Lord to be ordained ministers and commissioned officers in the Salvation Army, it was like, something's wrong. We're not hearing something right, because the Salvation Army is an ultra-conservative organization, and I was an entrepreneur spirit. And I said, they want to put me in a box and shut me down all the time. Well, everything I predicted did happen. But I pop up all the time like a jack in the box. I'm always in trouble with headquarters because I don't break regulations and orders and regulations, but I reinterpret them and I twist them and I reshape them. And I get my wrist slapped a lot, and I'm always like, I've learned, ask forgiveness, not permission. Because if I have permission, then I'm being defiant and I'm going to be a good soldier. At the end of the day, I do salute and march forward. But I want to tell you what we've been doing since the pandemic happened. This was February of 2020, March of 2020. And myself and several other people from Homeless Provider Services were in the mayor's office, Mayor Buddy Dyer, in a war room, because we didn't know what was happening. You didn't know what was happening then, but we knew something is happening here, pandemic, whatever. What are we going to do? How are we going to provide for people if this actually happens, as it did? And so that day, the TV was going like a war room discussing strategy and plans, and the governor announced the lockdown. So I get up to leave, and I'm walking out the door, and the mayor says, "Captain, where are you going?" I said, "Well, in my former life, I was an event producer. I got to go find a circus tent." "What do you mean a circus tent?" "I cannot socially distance people in the congregate shelter, 300 beds a night, with 6 feet distance. So we erected it." He said, "How are you going to pay for this?" I said, "I have no idea. But I said, I know this, that every time there's a hurricane, our mobile units go out, we're feeding, we're doing whatever relief is needed. We never start with resources, but by the end of the first day, we have all we need. So I've got to go out on this kind of faith." So we did it. We got an 8,700 square foot tent that we set up. Had to build a big platform, 35 tons of rock had to be brought in, gravel, portalets that are emptied and sanitized every day, electricity. We have heat pumped in during the 2 cold nights that Florida has. 3 meals a day, wash your clothes, shower units. It's a massive undertaking. 2 months later, we were doing a food distribution, and the mayor was there for publicity. And he said to me, "I learned a lot about faith that day from the Salvation Army." I said, "Well, Mr. Mayor, you learned more than you thought you did because you signed the $800,000 check to pay for this tent." We are now going into the 3rd year of the city funding this emergency operation. Our shelters right now are being shut down. The women's shelter and children's shelter is shut down because we've gutted it. If I use the word renovation, the city goes ballistic. But if you say modernization, they're like, oh, okay. So tell me whatever word you want me to say, I'll say it. And so we have women and children being sheltered off-site at an extended stay. We provide all the same services and case management that we provide. And in about another 6 weeks, our men's shelter will close for the same reason. That it's going to be an $8 million renovation for both of them, and then we will renovate the entire campus down the road. On any given night here in Orlando, 300 beds of shelter are filled every single night of the year. Our doors never close. 1,000 meals a day are served, prepared and served out of a horrible little kitchen that's about to be renovated. We have 140 at-risk youth that come 4 times a week from broken families with absolute horrible parents, and we are giving them life skills, character building, music lessons, and sports for free, hot meals 4 times a week that they wouldn't get perhaps if they were home, showing them there's another way to do this. You don't have to live your life and perpetuate these cycles that have been happening. And we have 319 elderly who live in the William and Catherine Booth Towers for an average of about $237 a month. And that's all inclusive. And so we are busy all the time. In Osceola County, we have what we call a service unit. So it's a Salvation Army with social services, but no church associated to it. Trim of your uniform, it identifies you as a commissioned officer and an ordained minister, men and women both. In 1865, when we were founded, women were ordained as ministers, and you got to know that was horrific back then. That's the Victorian age, and women didn't have rights. And so the Salvation Army has been very socially progressive through its whole history. So my wife and I are appointed together as the area commanders. We are also the pastors of the 200-member Salvation Army Church. Our church is Armenian Wesleyan, so you think you were at a Methodist service if you came to our church. So in Osceola County, we have a service unit, which is the social services without the church part of it. Our mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ through serving suffering humanity, but we love inclusively and we serve without discrimination. Meaning when we give you shelter or a cup of water or food or clothing, we're going to tell you about Jesus and that message. But if you don't accept it, we still love you, we still feed you, and no judgment. Because it's been a myth that you have to become a Christian to be served by the Salvation Army. Absolutely not true. Our founder called that soup, soap, and salvation. You can't preach to a man if he's hungry and dirty, so give him some soup, put some soap on him, and he might talk to you and listen to you about salvation. And that's the basic premise upon which we work. Now, in Osceola, we're doing some amazing things. Then we have a county commissioner, Commissioner Peggy Chowdhury, who should be wearing a uniform. Now, this lady is a Muslim, and she's bringing millions of dollars to a Christian organization. That is how a community builds itself. That is how a community works. When for-profit, non-profit, private citizens, and the government work together, that's when we build the right community. And she is doing that and bringing amazing results to the table. But we have out there, we feed 150 unhoused people, breakfast and lunch, shower program, clothes closet, food pantry. We have emotional spiritual care, a dental and medical clinic, and we just started a new program. So the big problem what would you say, if I ask you a question or somebody moves here and says, what is the biggest problem in Central Florida? What's the biggest challenge we're facing in Orlando area? What would you say? Housing is the crisis. Even for those of us who are financially stabilized, even for those of us who kind of have it together, it's a crisis for you too. Because 1,500 people are moving here every week. Eventually the infrastructure is not going to be able to support it, and already we're finding the housing cannot support it. So I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes, but we started a program in in Osceola County, funding from Commissioner Chowdhury of $1 million, where there are 25 families we have identified who are either very precariously housed or homeless. We're going to find, La Rosa Realty is working with us, Addition Financial is working with us, Career Source, we have a collaboration, Housing for All. So say if John Stein's family was in need, okay, we would assess where they are emotionally, financially, spiritually, socially, culturally, and we have what we call a hope quotient with our pathway of hope. And our hope quotient, say we're going to put him at a 42. We assess you at a 42. We'll say, okay, you're going to be working with this case manager, and by 6 weeks from now, we want you to be at a 53 on the hope quotient scale, and these are the steps you have to go through to get that: financial literacy, education, getting your credit established or repaired, back fines, all those things that are barriers to people being permanently housed. So, after a year, some maybe 18 months, 25 families who are precariously housed or homeless today will own their own homes. Because we will say, okay, La Rosa's going to find the landlords for us. We'll go to the landlords, and we have vetted this family. They're going to be in our program. They will be working twice a week with this case manager. We will hold them accountable. We will pay for their rent in advance for a whole year. And we'll say also, we have a fund set aside that if this family damages your house, we will repair it for you. So the landlord has no risk. And so the money that that family would have paid in rent, we have them put it in an escrow. And in a year to 18 months, when they have finished the program and completed all the steps that we've asked them to do, we will match and maybe sometimes double it, depending upon the circumstances, their down payment. And we will have 25 families permanently housed in houses that they own and can sustain. That is called Pathway to Housing. And that starts off in about a month. We're hiring people now. An amazing program that we believe can be a pilot program to help the housing crisis here in Central Florida. So here's the crisis. If you wake up tomorrow morning, Bill, and you got a flat tire, you're able to change it yourself and you have the resources to do that, or you're going to call AAA and have somebody do it for you. Yeah, you might call Dick to do it for you because he's always busy. But the people we serve, they don't have those resources. They see a flat tire and they can't go to work that day. Okay? They can't go to work, they lose their job. They can't afford the gas because gas has gotten crazy. Food has gotten crazy. They can't afford the basic living expenses. There are barriers that you and I take for granted. And that's where we come in to try to get people stabilized. I believe in a hand up and not a handout. Because if we are helping people and they're just there for the ride, if we have a day center for the unhoused to come in and give them the services that they need and they think you're going to play ping pong all day, no sir. You have to have skin in the game or go out and come back when you're ready to work with people. We will march alongside of you and hold your hand and give you all the resources you need, but you have to have skin in the game. Otherwise, we are perpetuating these cycles of generational poverty that continues to happen, and it just passed around. We cannot be a toxic charity. We have to be a charity that enables people and gives them the tools they need to be more productive citizens. So, when you lose your job because your car can't get you to work or you can't get to a bus line, what happens? There were people, I was leaving the other night and there were two cars parked out in the parking area that I didn't recognize, and I walked over. Two families were sleeping in their cars on our property because they knew it was safe and they knew they could get fed. But they would not go into the shelters because they were afraid to take their children into a shelter. And encourage them that it's very safe. And those things are happening. My office sits near a reception area where people come in, and when I'm there and I'm working in my office, I can hear all the people coming to our door. Listen to what I'm saying here. There is a new class of homelessness developing, people who never thought they would be in our line, and they are desperate. The Salvation Army does not have the resources to solve the problem. The Coalition for the Homeless does not have the resources to solve the problem. It will take us together doing that. It will take private industry and government and foundations and service clubs like the Rotary to solve the problems of the community. And the problem is we have families that are sleeping in their cars because we have no place to put them. There's no room in the inn. And even when they do get into some kind of precarious housing, they are having a difficult time sustaining that in an economy here that is just not. I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. But right now, capitalism is our enemy. Because this market is so hot, it's forcing people out of their homes. Rents going up some 100 and 200, 250% we're hearing. People coming to our doors that are 6 months behind in their mortgage or their rent, $1,600 a month. None of us have enough resources to make that happen. So how do we solve this problem? It is growing. I've said it from the beginning. We don't have enough ARPA money to give out. The government can't give out the money they gave out before. They didn't put it in the right places. I'm sorry. They squandered it on things because the problem is now, not then. Now we're going to see the residual effects of people who cannot sustain a lifestyle because gas and food and housing is way out of their range. In an economy, in a city, the most magical place in the world, where we have people, we are so attractive, our climate, our environment, all of the services we have together, we are making the difference. I don't have a watch, so I'm going to keep my time watching it. We have to come together to solve this. So here's one of my solutions. We are opening up a lot more case management to try to get people connected with resources. We are collaborating with other agencies. We can't do everything, they can't do everything, but when we come together, we can provide a one-stop place for people to come and be served. We need to be looking at what I call bridge housing. Now, the studies will tell us, and I was arguing with Homeless Services Network yesterday at City Hall. It was a heated argument. He kept telling me the study showed that bridge housing doesn't work. A bridge to where? Bridge housing does not change the homelessness numbers. We have no choice at this point. We need to build little houses. There's a concept called pallet shelters where you put it up 45 minutes and it sustains winds of 170. We create little villages. The Salvation Army is doing this in Los Angeles and on the West Coast and being very successful with it, where families can move into these container homes or little houses or the little villages. And we have case managers working with them a year, 18 months to get them stabilized, to get them where and give the community time. If we got $1 trillion given to us today, we cannot create the inventory in housing we need in affordable housing. We can't do it with maybe a year or two. So what do we do with the folks now? My solution is bridge housing. A year to 18 months, and then they'll have the tools they need, and perhaps we'll have a better inventory at that time. But we have a crisis coming, and I would urge you to talk to your elected officials about that. They need to listen to this. The problem with that, the challenge with that is land. Where do you put it? Well, there's abandoned industrial sites. There are strip malls that are abandoned. The county, especially Orange County, has unincorporated land that's not being used. Let us use the land temporarily. Have to change some of the ordinances because you got to bring the services there to make it work. But we as a community have to address this problem, and we cannot bury our head in the sand over it. I go to sleep every night thinking about this, and I wake up thinking about it. My heart is heavy when I go home for the stories that I hear coming to our door, and we have to say to some of them, all the beds are taken. We can give you a bag lunch, or here's a plated supper, but the beds are taken. I'm sorry. I think I remember a story like that where the inn was full. Yeah. So maybe we can make the difference. Maybe we can step out and make the difference. But what encouraged me, this is what encouraged me. Yesterday, I was walking by the reception desk and a man was at the door and he pushed the button on the intercom and he said, I knew if I could make it to the Salvation Army, I would be okay. Well, that just gives me courage. That gives me strength to move further, to work another day to solve this problem. If I could just make it to the Salvation Army, I'll be okay. And that weight is on my shoulders. There's a lot of them that need to make their way to the Salvation Army. And you are the people that keep us going. So we're grateful. I could talk to you about a lot of other stuff, but I'm sure there's a few questions because I'm always respectful of your time. But capitalism, I get it. If I own and I get $125 more a month, or I get $500 more a month, I'm going to do it. I'm for profit. I'm in a different world now. I'm in nonprofit. I'm looking at it from a different standpoint. I believe every person in this room and most of the people in this community have a heart for people who are trying to keep their families together and keep a roof over their head. We need to do our part because we don't care. Who else is going to care? Amen? Amen.
On behalf of the entire club, I'd like to thank Ken Chapman for that wonderful program. Now, when he came here, he was just expecting to eat lunch. He did not know he was going to be the program today, and I think he did a great job.